The vibrant city of Rio de Janeiro, known for its breathtaking landscapes and lively culture, played host to a pivotal moment in global politics. The city, often associated with celebration and festivity, became the backdrop for serious discussions that would shape the future of international relations. President Biden arrived at the G20 summit with a clear purpose. His arrival was marked by a sense of urgency and determination, as he stepped off Air Force One, ready to engage with world leaders on pressing global issues. He was determined to solidify his legacy on the world stage. Biden's speeches and meetings were meticulously planned, each word and gesture aimed at reinforcing his stance on key matters. His first act was a decisive one. In a bold move, he signed a series of documents that would have far-reaching implications. Biden authorized long-range missiles for Ukraine. This decision was not made lightly. It was a calculated step to support Ukraine in its ongoing conflict with Russia. This bold move sent a message to the world. It was a clear indication that the United States was willing to take significant measures to uphold international law and support its allies. America stood with Ukraine against Russian aggression. The support was not just military. It was a statement of solidarity with a nation fighting for its sovereignty. The timing was no coincidence. Biden's actions were carefully timed to coincide with key moments in the geopolitical landscape, ensuring maximum impact. The shadow of former President Trump loomed large over the summit. His previous policies and potential return to power were topics of intense discussion among the delegates. Trump's potential return to power stoked fears of a different approach to Russia, a softer approach. Analysts speculated on how a shift in U.S. leadership could alter the dynamics of international relations, one that might embolden Putin even further. The possibility of a more lenient U.S. stance on Russia under Trump was a cause for concern among many world leaders. Biden's actions were a stark reminder of the choice facing the world. The decisions made at the summit would have lasting consequences, shaping the future of global politics and security. As the summit progressed, the vibrant energy of Rio de Janeiro served as a poignant contrast to the weighty discussions taking place. The city's spirit of resilience and hope mirrored the aspirations of the global community for a more stable and just world. The G20 summit in Rio was more than just a meeting of world leaders. It was a defining moment in the quest for peace and cooperation. The decisions made here would resonate far beyond the borders of Brazil, influencing the course of history for years to come. As the sun set over Rio, the world watched with bated breath, hopeful that the outcomes of this summit would pave the way for a brighter, more united future. The specter of Trump haunted the halls of the G20 summit. His presence was felt even in his absence, a testament to the lasting impact of his controversial tenure as President of the United States. The world leaders gathered here could not ignore the looming possibility of his return to power, a scenario that seemed to cast a long shadow over their discussions and decisions. Whispers of his potential return to power echoed among world leaders. These whispers were not just idle chatter. They were filled with concern and speculation about what a second Trump presidency could mean for global politics. The uncertainty was palpable, as leaders exchanged furtive glances and hushed tones, trying to gauge each other's thoughts and strategies. Trump had never shied away from praising Putin. His admiration for the Russian leader was well documented, and it had always been a point of contention among his critics. They feared that his return could lead to a realignment of international alliances, with potentially dire consequences for the balance of power. He had questioned America's commitment to NATO, a cornerstone of Western security since World War II. His skepticism about the alliance's value had unsettled many of America's traditional allies, who wondered if they could count on U.S. support in times of crisis. This uncertainty lingered, making it difficult for leaders to fully commit to any new initiatives. His past actions painted a clear picture. From his trade wars to his withdrawal from international agreements, Trump's presidency had been marked by a series of disruptive moves that had left the global community on edge. The prospect of a return to such unpredictability was a source of anxiety for many. Trump viewed Putin as a potential ally, not a threat. This perspective was at odds with the prevailing view among Western leaders, who saw Russia as a significant adversary. The idea that Trump might once again steer U.S. foreign policy in a direction that favored Russia was deeply troubling to many. This uncertainty cast a pall over the summit. The leaders' faces reflected their concerns, their serious expressions a mirror of the tense atmosphere that pervaded the venue. Every discussion, every decision, was tinged with the question of what the future might hold if Trump were to return to the world stage. Many world leaders wavered in their commitment to Biden's vision. President Biden had come to the summit with a clear agenda, but the specter of Trump made it difficult for some leaders to fully embrace his proposals. They were wary of making commitments that might be upended by a change in U.S. leadership. Some even planned side meetings with Trump. These clandestine discussions were a sign of the uncertainty that gripped the summit. Leaders were hedging their bets, preparing for all possible outcomes, including the return of a leader who had once upended the global order. These meetings were scheduled for after the G20. The fact that such meetings were being arranged was a clear indication of the influence Trump still wielded. Even out of office, he remained a key player in the global political arena, his potential return a factor that could not be ignored. Trump's estate in Mar-a-Lago would be their destination. The opulent Florida estate had become a symbol of Trump's enduring influence, a place where deals were made and alliances forged. The fact that world leaders were willing to meet him there spoke volumes about his continued relevance, a clear sign of the influence Trump still wielded. His ability to draw crowds and command attention was undiminished, and his supporters remained fervently loyal. As the G20 summit drew to a close, the shadow of Trump loomed large, a reminder that in the world of politics, the past is never truly past. Biden's decision to arm Ukraine with long-range missiles was a gamble. It was a calculated risk aimed at deterring further Russian aggression. These missiles would give Ukraine a fighting chance. They could strike deep inside Russian-held territory. It was a clear escalation of American support. The move was not without its critics. Some argued it would only escalate the conflict. Others feared it might provoke a dangerous response from Putin. But Biden remained resolute. He believed it was a necessary step to protect democracy, not just in Ukraine, but around the world. Biden's reception at the G20 was not entirely warm. While some leaders welcomed his leadership, others remained skeptical. The shadow of Trump's potential return created a sense of unease. Many world leaders were hesitant to fully commit to Biden's agenda. The presence of Xi Jinping, China's paramount leader, added another layer of complexity. Jinping's dominance at the summit emboldened Trump's anti-China faction back in the United States. It was a delicate balancing act for Biden. He needed to stand up to China's growing influence while maintaining a working relationship. Section 5. The fentanyl crisis, a shared threat. Beyond the war in Ukraine, Biden also addressed other pressing issues at the G20. The fentanyl crisis, a scourge that had claimed countless lives on both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border, was a top priority. Biden met with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum to discuss a coordinated response. Both leaders agreed on the need for greater cooperation. They discussed strategies to disrupt the flow of fentanyl into the United States. Biden stressed the importance of targeting the criminal organizations responsible for producing and trafficking this deadly drug. Section 6. Deportations, a looming crisis. The issue of immigration also took center stage. Biden's meeting with President Sheinbaum was overshadowed by Trump's looming deportation plan. Trump had vowed to declare a national emergency. This would grant him sweeping powers to deport undocumented immigrants. The plan sparked outrage among immigrant rights groups. They argued it would tear families apart and devastate the U.S. economy. Biden sought to reassure Sheinbaum that he would oppose any attempt to enact such a draconian policy. The G20 summit in Rio laid bare the stark contrast between Biden and Trump. Biden, the seasoned statesman, offered a vision of multilateralism and global cooperation. He believed in working with allies to address common challenges. Trump, on the other hand, represented a more isolationist approach. He favored unilateral action and distrusted international institutions. These contrasting visions had profound implications for the world. Biden's approach, while complex and challenging, offered a path toward a more stable and prosperous future. Trump's vision, in contrast, promised a return to a more volatile and uncertain world order. Section 8. The stakes have never been higher. As the G20 summit drew to a close, one thing was clear: the stakes had never been higher. The discussions held in those hallowed halls were not just about economic policies or trade agreements, they were about the future of our planet. Climate change, global health crises, and geopolitical tensions were all on the table, and the decisions made here would ripple across the globe. The world watched with bated breath as Biden and Trump prepared for another showdown. This wasn't just another election, it was a battle for the soul of a nation. Both leaders represented starkly different visions for the future, and their policies would shape not only the United States but also its role on the global stage. The outcome of their contest would have far-reaching consequences. In cafes, living rooms, and public squares around the world, people debated the potential impacts. Would the U.S. continue to lead in the fight against climate change, or would it retreat into isolationism? Would international alliances be strengthened or weakened, not just for the United States, but for the entire world? The interconnected nature of our modern society means that decisions made in Washington, D.C. can affect lives in distant corners of the globe. From trade policies that impact global markets to environmental regulations that influence global climate efforts, the ripple effects are undeniable. The choice before the world was stark. Would we move towards a future of unity and collaboration, or would we descend into a period of division and strife? The paths diverged dramatically, and the direction chosen would set the tone for international relations for years to come. A future defined by cooperation and diplomacy, or one marred by conflict and division? The stakes were not just political, but deeply personal. For many, the election represented a choice between hope and fear, between progress and regression. The answer, it seemed, lay in the hands of the American people. As voters headed to the polls, the weight of their decision was palpable. Campaign rallies were filled with passionate supporters, each side convinced that their candidate held the key to a better future. Their decision in the upcoming election would determine the fate of the world for years to come. The White House, a symbol of American power and influence, stood as a reminder of the immense responsibility resting on the shoulders of every voter. Global leaders watched closely, knowing that the outcome would shape international policies and alliances. The stakes had never been higher, and the world held its breath, waiting to see which path would be chosen.